The Edifice Complex podcast is brought to you by DCM, the Drawing Specialists, Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software, and Sensor Suite, the future of intelligent buildings.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, friend, and Yoda of most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello. So I am interested in this conversation because we're touching on one of my favorite pet ideas that all engineers are going to evolve into data scientists to some degree. So we're going to drill down on that a bit today.
Absolutely. And other things as well.
Yeah.
Today's guest earned her Ph.D. from the University of Toronto in aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering, and has 30 years of experience in the aerospace and computational industry for fixed and rotary wing aircraft. She is the owner and research director of Shanty Engineering and Research, and previously served as a senior aerodynamicist. That's a new word for me, for Sikorsky Aircraft, and was a research associate for Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Welcome to the show, Hema Murty.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, so Dr. Murty, like Adam and Christoph, we met in one of my courses that I was teaching, and what intrigued me the most from your participation was coming from a field that we don't normally see in our courses. And as it turns out, you like to take your brain on a journey, many journeys, exposing it to all kinds of different fields of study. And that's one of the reasons why we love you and why we wanted to have you on the show. You really are one of our poster children, multidisciplinary studies, and your level of curiosity is magnificent. Tell our audience where did that start from? What's your story?
Yeah, great question. Thinking back, first of all, like my PhD is in aerospace studies, so that's the official title. But, we all on this call definitely know that engineering is multidisciplinary in nature, and it's not very bifurcated in the sense that you can just look at one thing and hope to solve the engineering problem to your own satisfaction of curiosity. I mean, we all got into engineering because we're curious, right? The old French word ingénieur, like we're just curious and we want to know what's involved in solving a problem. And we learn early on that it's not just ever one thing. It's not, it might be the solution might end up being one equation or one thing, but it's really not. It's a bunch of things. And the more the mind can grasp that every solution to every single problem on the planet is multifaceted, whether it shows up or not in a blatant way is not the point. The point is there something else figuring into the solution? So what engineers normally do, and I'm talking to the choir here, but we normally just look at the biggest thing because it's so. If we said, okay, we're going to look at every single thing, we'll be here all night and the problem won't be solved and the airplane would crash by the time you figured out, what you need to fix. So that's not the way to go, but, pick up the macroscopic part of that problem, solve it, and then we know we're 90% there. And is the thing going to fly? Okay, it will safely. Yeah. Okay. So, good to go. And we'll work on the other things later. So basically that's what got me here, is just curiosity. And I think when I was in high school, I was always interested in science. I think my mother's influence was she was a scientist at heart, and I think her father is a teacher. So I think that natural kind of curiosity got into me, and I was always very curious and watched science programs, read science books, and then I think in high school, they did the Viking landing was really popular at that time, and Carl Sagan would always come on TV and explain how that lander was going to get to Mars from Earth, first of all, and once it got there, what it was going to do. And I thought that was amazing. If that's what science does, sign me up. I'm ready. I'm going to go. So yeah, from there onwards, it was pretty easy. I mean, I was, finishing up high school. So did my undergraduate in mechanical engineering, which is what the university was offering. I don't want to specialize too early. I just want to get a broad understanding of what this whole beast called engineering was. And I had a strong math background already. I was really good at math. So I think that helped. A lot of people told me that. So I didn't have to worry about trying to figure out how to do stuff. I just had to figure out how I was going to get to that point where that Mars rover and I would meet up. Like I wanted to do those things. Yeah. So that's my
down.
Sorry?
Gonna flag it down as it goes.
Yeah, flag it down. Here I am. What's the next Mars rover 2? Yeah, exactly. So, that's my short story. I think, you're presented with the excitement of how you could use yourself in terms of implementing what you know and what you're excited about, and how can you, push technology forward. And if there's some part of that I can be involved in, sign me up kind of thing. So I went from there, and I think, undergraduate is never enough for anybody, because you really want to, you're just getting like bits and pieces of a whole buffet here, like one piece of one thing. And you really just want to get in there and say, no, I this isn't enough for me. I could certainly figure this out on the fly, which is one route to go. Certainly that's an option. You can get a regular job in a company and then start from there. And that's totally fine. But I just wanted to figure something out more. So I went to Toronto with the Institute of Aerospace Studies. And I thought that was a cool thing to do, just because they were studying so many different things that I just wanted to know. Then, it blows up from there, because aerospace is not one thing, just like engineering is not one thing. But the integrated approach was always at the back of my mind. So even despite the fact that people would always promote like one thing over the other, there'd be, again, disparate groups. Like gas dynamics is where I started, but there's also the spacecraft dynamicists who have nothing to do with fluids, don't look at me kind of thing. But, those groups do exist. And so you get this big spectrum of the whole field being a bunch of pieces that need to be understood, and so then in that high school mind was still there, right? So I wanted to figure out, okay, so this means that in order to get some kind of a product out that's functional, that's new, cutting edge, that will solve mankind's issues or push it forward, you have to put a bunch of pieces together. And certainly you could understand one, but you do need a bunch of things. There was all kinds of disciplines at that location, with all different types of research streams, which may or may not have anything to do with each other, in the sense that they could be studying vacuum performance, like a spacecraft. And then you're here with the full throttle fluid flow sitting in the next thing. And so I realized, this is a big domain, and you could do a lot of things, but you have to really understand how all the pieces get together. And no one in isolation could ever put a product out there and hope that it can get to a point where it can make an advance. So from there on, I went to do my Ph.D. I was in gas dynamics for my master's degree, and then in my Ph.D. I wanted to kind of go more the aerodynamics. And at that time, I was always, from high school onwards, keeping an eye on NASA, because I remembered NASA was the buzzword at the back of my mind, because they were the ones that were doing all the promotional press conferences, where people would come up and say, hey, I discovered this, here's a picture of this on this, and and so on. And they would be explaining all the stuff that they did. It may not even have been Mars anymore. It may have been some other thing. I just caught on that they were doing a lot of cool stuff. So NASA's work was always at the back of my mind. So whatever they'd be doing, I'd keep up to date. And then at that time, computers weren't, it wasn't easy to say, let's Google this. It was, a lot of work. I mean, you barely did your work with, your hands mostly, and computers were a secondary tool. So you would use your own intelligence to figure out where to get the information. And sometimes you'd write a certain, researcher and investigator, you'd write them personally and say, hey, I saw,
what a concept.
Yeah, so-and-so, please will you, I'm just a poor student, so, yeah.
Well, I'm going to pause you there for a second, because there's a great story. Notre Dame College, just outside of Regina, Wilcox, Saskatchewan, of all places. If anybody knows where it is, I'd be shocked. But the guy that started was Father Hema Murty, and he was a prolific writer. And back in the day, like in the 30s, they had no money. Like there was no money around, there was no food, but he would write world leaders from everywhere. Well, as it turns out, he ended up communicating with one of Napoleon Bonaparte's relatives who had Napoleon's library. We're talking about the Nuremberg Chronicles. Like, this is a rare document, right? Yeah. Anyway, the college ends up with this collection of books in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan. It's a world-class library. It should be in the Smithsonian, you would think, right? But it's not. It's like 20, 30 minutes out of Regina, Saskatchewan. And the only reason why it happened is because he wrote letters to world leaders. Cool. And the response for that is a legendary library in the middle of nowhere.
That's cool.
That's very cool.
That reminds me of me.
Yeah, well, that's why.
Here's this NASA scientist, busy. His boss is probably saying, did you fix that code yet? Or did you, make that gizmo work yet? Where's your team? Blah, blah, blah. In the middle, he gets this letter from this little tiddlywinks person from Toronto. Where's that? Does anybody know where Canada is? And then says, I'm working on this project. I saw your paper on blah, blah, blah. I can't get a copy. Can you please send me, a copy of this and anything related to this? Because I'm really interested in this topic. And I know that you've done work on it. So thanks very much, Hema. And then here I come home one day, and then there's this, big stack of papers sitting, because the post office would just, flop it in front of your door. There was no organization in those days. Hopefully it was there when you got home, So there was this whole stack of papers, and I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. The guy actually wrote back. And then when I completed my degree, he was actually one of my external examiners, and then invited me to NASA to give a talk on all the work that I had done. And I actually asked this, I know, it was amazing. And then I actually asked his staff to help me if I needed any more support material, because, in those days it wasn't really easy to download papers and things like that, what they do now. But, and you actually had to physically get the guy to send you them in the mail. So
what's interesting about your story there is, one thing that struck me is the importance of having science and the advancement of science and STEM in culture, right? So you talk about Carl Sagan. For me, I'm a bit older. It was Star Trek, right? Today, it's Elon Musk. Culture, you have to have present in the culture the thirst for this, or it's not going to go anywhere, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think all my undergrad class, I remember everyone saying, I want to build a transporter beam. I want to build a phaser. So, I mean, Star Trek was definitely one of and even now, I think the other day they interviewed one of those last set of astronauts on the space station, and someone said something like, I was on Star Trek. And I mean, not, since Star Trek has gone on since 1967 or something. Yeah. So it was one of the recent ones, which I have not kept up on, but I know what they're talking about. I mean, all that gizmo technology that they kind of imagine could be possible, so they're into that. And I think that you're right. I mean, there's got to be something somewhere along the line where somebody says to you, this thing that isn't in existence yet, it's possible. And, maybe dream it and maybe make it.
Captain Kirk, all these people, they're inspirational figures, right? But they're cultural icons. So one of the problems we have with buildings, and which we're going to get onto in a minute, is there's no cultural icons or buildings or making buildings better in the culture isn't there. It's on HGTV. Oh, I'm going to rip my kitchen out and put in a granite top. But it's not about the technology and the advancement of it as a science, right? It's the cosmetics of it. The culture is focusing on the cosmetics and not the science and the advancement of it. And I find we need a Captain Kirk for buildings, right?
Absolutely, we do. I think you're absolutely right. And I think the only way that's possible is if they have more PR in this. I see it now with the social platforms. I think we have more PR now, just because, people will log into a serious platform that we have some respect for, and then they will kind of chase down somebody they know, or they'll see a good picture and say, oh, who's this person? So because of social platforms, I think there might be now some of that. But you're right, the charismatic nature of Carl Sagan, the charismatic nature of Captain Picard, the whole, what you're talking about isn't there in that sense. What you're saying is that, where you can grab the attention of a school-age kid and say, you could be a super, whatever, in this field, if you want to dream about
Captain Kirk of engineers, building engineers.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me.
I prefer Picard because Picard is more of a cerebral guy,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Kirk was kind of like,
Kirk was a playboy.
And the West, I kind of think of him as Ponderosa. Ponderosa of the space age, like
Captain Kirk was more frontier, kick the door in, pick up.
Yeah.
Totally.
No,
let's talk about it.
I think I liked Spock more, you see, because Spock would be in charge of the gizmos. See, he made sure those gizmos worked, and he used his brain. And I thought, hey, that's it. That's what I want to do. And I think that's where we need to go. And sure, the emotion is what drives people. You got to get excitement for it. But ultimately, I think the trick is like what you were saying about the origin story. I think the trick here, if I would want to boil it down to one, is the fact that people showed in a very dramatic way that every human being has a brain, and if they use it if they use it to the maximum capacity that they're capable of, your potential, you want to spend your life discovering your potential, and you could do a lot of good stuff, but you have to sit down one day and tell yourself, hey, I'm really talented. Okay, I may not be showing it now because I don't have all the pieces together, but what a life that would be if I spent it discovering what all those pieces were, and and along the way did some some maybe helpful stuff. That would be cool. And even if I didn't, what a great discovery would be of how far I could possibly take.
Adam, we need to have Hema as our prime minister. I don't know what we just, that right there is the way to inspire a generation. And go back to science as a culture, and I'm serious about that. We're gonna science as culture, and the author now, I'm drawing a blank, but the title of the book was "The World Was Flat." I don't remember.
Oh, yeah.
Friedman.
Yeah, Friedman, and and early on in the book, he talks about different nations around the world whose ethos was science-based versus economics or law-based, as our system here is in North America. But when you get outside of North America, there are other nations that it's a science-based culture. India is one of them, right? Germany right now, with their leadership being scientists, and when you look at the fluidity of their social systems under engineering principles versus law systems or economic systems, like the U.S. right now is a mess. I'm not saying Canada's any better, but, because we have our own issues, but it's not like other societies, where that book.
Well, totally. And I think you're right about the culture issue. I know, as I said early on, my mother was a big influence on science and the scientific mind. And Actually, she was the one that was more interested in Star Trek and said, "Hey, this is a great show. You guys go watch it. I gotta do housework or whatever." And I was like, "Oh yeah, Spock, I'm in. That's it." And then Captain Picard came along later. But so I get what you're saying. I mean, culturally, the mindset and the culture that I guess I grew up in was that. I have cousins who are engineers already, who are a lot older than me. So I mean, I know that in India, that's a big proportion. And I know a lot of scientists in India that are women, and I know a lot of them started at a very young age. So there could be that element of it in terms of, cultural promotion of, the mindset and education being valuable. And
people need role models. And it's interesting, right? So you think your attention was grabbed when you were very young.
Right? Oh yeah, definitely.
And that's not unusual. We've all had that experience. For me, Star Trek was about exploration, right?
Definitely.
And that's made me a nomad most of my career.
I don't know. I was always listening for Scotty to come on. I was Scotty.
Yeah, chief engineer. Yeah, I know.
That was my guy.
They made him, they could have made him a lot better, but the chief engineer is definitely, a problem solver.
Yeah,
but
totally.
the only casting issue I had with that character, and I know as an engineer I should be, rah Scotty, but the problem I had with the way they made that stereotype is that he would come in after, Kirk and Spock said what to do. And then it seemed to me like he was following orders. Go fix that thing. Okay, pull it out, blah, blah, put it back. The transporter beam works now.
That's the nature of engineering, right? So in our culture, engineering and problem solving is subordinate to leadership.
Oh, right? Yeah.
That's an observation you could make for Canada and America, I'd say. But let's get on to sort of bigger stuff. So, clearly you're academic. Congratulations on
Thanks.
That. I bowed at the end.
Don't hold that against me.
Oh.
The other thing I like, I want to talk about data science in a minute, but for me, life is a Venn diagram. It's a series of overlapping Venn diagrams, right? So your career and how you've approached it is really that, right? Because you've been in the aeronautical engineering fields, you're in the computational science field, and then the data science field overlaps that, right? Yeah. This is my other frustration with the built environment. It resists this Venn diagram of overlapping sometimes, right? It likes its silo, it likes its blinkered look.
Yes.
So I'd like to talk about data analytics and data science, because I believe this is one of the things that is going to bleed to all professions ultimately, right?
Oh yeah.
All businesses are in the data business, but 80% of them just don't realize it yet, is my opinion.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail, because when I came back from my stint at Sikorsky, I told myself that, falling into it's, the 2000s now, and falling into any kind of a bucket and narrowing yourself is going to be a huge mistake. And the only way to go forward in problem solving, which is why I like integrated anything, if you have a course on integrated solutions of things, I'm there, because the only way going forward now in 2000 and onwards, there is absolutely no excuse for a person to omit a discipline from the problem solving table, because we are so integrated in not only with the World Wide Web, physically and in terms of getting information, but also people are more mobile now. If you want to work with a researcher in another country, in a day, that person could be standing, not today, but then, that person previously could be sitting beside you, and you could be, putting your heads together and, hey, let's get this, kind of thing. And so that kind of mentality has to break down, that, thou wilt only, look at your little disciplined corner of the world like the frog in the well. That's just going to be a disaster. And I think, I'm going out to say this, but, I think we can all agree that today's problems in the world have stemmed from this myopic vision of anything, not just engineering, although engineering is is causing the fact that you're not getting solutions in engineering is causing some domino effect problems. However, in every discipline, this is happening, and I think that the arts is finally getting that faster because you see now multidisciplinary, but their mindset works differently than those of us in the, science and engineering worlds or politics, even that the social sciences, they still lag behind a little bit in that multidisciplinary integrated approach. So
yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I love that frog in the well analogy, by the way. Kudos on that. I'm going to be stealing that. I mean, you've worked in what I would let's call them serious industries, helicopter design, avionics in military. It doesn't get any more serious than that, right?
Well, there's consequences.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Half-arsing it is not an option, right?
No.
And then you've also sort of put your foot and looked into the built environment. So how do you compare and contrast these two places?
Oh, very interesting question. In the sense that I haven't really understood the full panorama. I'm beginning to understand the full panorama of the building science industry. I got interested in it for obvious reasons because I'm a curious person, and I think problem solving ultimately ends in all disciplines coming together, and I'm trying to pick up those pieces to put solutions together, because sometimes things land on my desk, which, as I said before, I'm an integrated approach person, and sometimes reports come on my desk which I have to work on, or I have to fix, or I have to audit, and they have elements which I feel are not addressed or are addressed incorrectly. So I go and learn about it. And a lot of times that's a building science issue, and I know it's poorly addressed. So I have to advise that, that's not been addressed properly. Don't look at me, but go find somebody, who knows way more than you have put in this thing, and let them talk about it. So at least you can address it at some level and then move from there, at level 0. So I feel like the myopic vision sometimes pervades a lot of disciplines far longer than maybe they should have. Not to say that they're not doing something about it, but maybe that trajectory is slowed down by a culture of that industry that may be more prone to hugging previous ways of problem solving. And it takes a while for a person to give up something they've done for a while and just have that light bulb moment where I say, well, the thing I did over here a couple of years ago, times have changed, situations change, engineering data has changed. I got to switch over. Now what? But then you're left in this limbo. You got to be comfortable with that as an engineer. You might be left in a limbo at some point when you kind of jettison previous ways of doing things, but you got to be comfortable with that jettisoning your previous adopted methods, and then say, I'm going to be in a limbo here for a while. If I had total freedom of problem solving, and I don't have my hat on that I had before, took off my hat of, whatever I was, engineer, aerospace engineer, whatever, I'm going to be a person trying to solve this problem with the brain I have, with the data I have. What do I do? Then I think you can come up with a better solution. And you can also, now, as I said, with, internet being instantaneous, you can contact people and say, give me your 2 cents worth. We're not, doing a big long dance here, but, I have this thing, I'm working on this. This is what I'm trying to do. Yay or nay? Am I down the wrong path? What's your input? And you don't have to just take people for face value. You can take their input and say, at the end of the day, it's your decision. But I think that's what may be missing. I mean, just throwing that out as my current idea of how I see it, based on what I know. And I know there's people who have been in this field for much longer, but that's my current assessment of it with what I have on my table right now.
I know Adam wants to take this conversation into the data side, but when he's done, I want to
come back at me.
I'm going to come back and then apply what you just said to our understanding of COVID and
we got to get to that.
because So go ahead, Adam.
That's a good point.
Data science, just to answer to because I didn't actually finish, because your question was more about, the current state of how we see the data science approach, problem solving. So currently the science of data analysis, and I know there's going to be a lot of differing opinions about it, but let me say, from the trajectory I came to this point, let me preamble it, and my perspective from where I sit, knowing that there's a multitude other perspectives. Having said that, from my perspective as really an outsider, just using data, knowing that data is the key to problem solving. And that's all I've been doing, only it's been called something else. I mean, that's what engineers do, whether we do test data out in the field, in an aircraft out in the wind tunnel, on your guys' cases with the buildings and in inside data, internal data, interior data, whatever data it is, or from a computational fluid dynamics code, data is data. I mean, ultimately the numbers fall on your plate, and there's only one question everybody needs to answer. Do these numbers have anything to do with real life? And that's the first question you have to ask yourself. And decide once and for all at the moment you're trying to solve the problem. So just to segue into your question, is that the data science people have kind of done things. Again, they've started a culture of doing things a certain way. And again, there's the possibility, it's very new. I mean, relatively speaking, considering, aircraft industry is a lot older, like just looking at data itself and marrying the statistical methods to the engineering field. Again, that, myopia is common, right? I mean, that whole discipline of statistics and probability was used to do some modeling, but they never spilled it over into the engineering data and say, hey, did you know that you could create a whole new field now by looking at, these gigabytes, terabytes or, ultra terabytes of data that are sitting in computers from all of the analysis we've been doing, either, as I said, field literal data or computational data, and throw the whole field of statistics and probability and, the whole stochastic nature of flow fields, for example, on it. Did you know you could create a whole discipline called data analysis on it? Well, yeah, I did, because I was doing it way back when I did my first little wing in the little, wind tunnel, where I just put a little probe there and calculated pressure. I mean, that was what that was. So giving a fancy name to something doesn't make it any clearer what it is, but, the discipline has to evolve. And it's evolved to a point now where, again, people are hugging theories, people are hugging pet ideas, and making the puppet do what they want it to do. So there's a danger that everything is a double-edged sword, right?
So you've hit on one of the potential flaws here is, as you're saying, it can't just be data-driven, right? There has to be analysis and interpretation, right? So
there has to be a brain in the loop, yeah.
If you're just looking at raw data, then you can go down a terrible path if you're not careful.
You could do anything you want. It's a puppet. I mean, making something a master, which is a slave, is a big danger in anything, in any kind of a field. Like if you made the piano tell you what to play, then, I mean, you've got a problem there. So that kind of a thing has to stop across the board, not just in data science. I mean, you shouldn't pick on one field. I mean, they're trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and they've developed a lot of serious methods. But at the end of the day, there's still methods, and the human brain has to interfere at the end of the day and say, that's a great method for what? Fill in the box.
But you know what? You've hit the nail on the head there, because it's not a pure science; it's an applied science, right? Correct. And that is a very important distinction that people, because you could bad leaders, uninformed, or people who don't understand what they're looking at can take these things, run with it, and just create a whale of bad consequences, right? So the application of data analysis is really important, which is why I'm excited for it for the building sector, because the building sector is primarily an applied science field, right?
Yeah.
Pure science field. Thank God for that, because I'm terrible at pure science and pure math, right? But it's the application of science and knowledge to get insight, right?
Yes.
And I think that message is really getting lost at the moment. People are going, oh, follow the data, follow the data. What is it? It takes you over the cliff. Are you going over?
Yeah, that's exactly where people are going to go. And I hope you have a good insurance policy, because that is not going to solve the problem at the end. And then when you just said, Adam, that, follow the data, what data? Like, that's another, I mean, you got to be clear. Right? What data did you take? Did you stick a probe in the middle of the room and go, that looks good? You have to be clear about what data did you take? Did you consult the people who are involved with, that problem? Who, I mean, again, I'm throwing that multidisciplinary word in, but unfortunately, you cannot solve a problem if you don't, solve it from all sides of the. It's like describing that 4 blind people describing an elephant. I mean, you got to get the information from all sides, or you're going to think it's a big trunk.
Now, I'm going to stop violently agreeing with you for a minute, but the other thing is, this touches on another trigger point for me, is universities are supposed to teach critical thinking, right? And that's what applied knowledge is.
Yes.
And I just find that message is not getting out there. I'm very worried that message is being subsumed, because a lovely graph, what does Peter Simmons call it? Colors for directors. Lovely graphs, lovely CFD analysis.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Telling me.
It was also called color flow fluid dynamics, because you could throw a color in the paint program, this pressure will have this. Oh no, I should add some more color so it looks better.
Yeah. Okay,
the lift didn't change though, did it? It's still the bad aircraft you designed a long time ago. So I think that what you're trying to point at is very important, and we're facing that today. And maybe that'll segue into Robert's issues with the COVID, is this whole. I think a lot of things, what this pandemic has done is brought to the surface a lot of things that we should be doing better, education being one of them. Now, not to parrot his name, but I remember Carl Sagan saying, when I was in university, he had something else, another project that he was talking about on TV. And he said, we should have a course called baloney detection in university, because he thought, university by that time, you're on your own and you're thinking a little bit independently. So he thought, mature enough to understand what that means. And he said, everyone should be equipped with what is called a baloney detector, because he himself was explaining this principle of science being sometimes presented incorrectly. So today we'll say that, but in that, in that time, that was not, we swallowed whatever, David Suzuki. I mean, he's going to be correct all the time, most of the time, but, there are some people who profess themselves to be scientists, or, maybe they did dabble in something and they're half a politician, maybe they had an agenda. And sometimes they'll push a theory. And he said, no, that's quite true. Science is interesting, but you still got to, at the end of the day, say, does this make sense? Question it, and maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. I'm not saying it's always wrong, but, the idea that you should question something, I think, is what he was trying to get at, that you shouldn't swallow. Now, getting back to Adam's point about the education system, I totally understand the other side of that coin, because here you are, they're going to send you out on, potentially they're going to send this kid out at the end of 4 years onto a live, person dependent thing, whether it be a building, whether it be a bridge, whether it be an aircraft. potentially you could be in charge, because that's what they're kind of sanctifying you as an engineer. You've gone through the all the coursework, all the knowledge base. Maybe you slept through it, but still they're sanctifying you as an engineer. And so at the end of the day, their, kind of name is on the line, and they've got to cram all this coursework. I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to say this person can solve this problem. I've sanctified this person as saying they've got the engineering knowledge to solve the problem. And they're putting their name on it. So ramming coursework through is the only way they know how. Now, I think since things have progressed to the point where they're doing internships and co-ops, I think that's helping a little bit with the practicality of working with other people, not just in a high school environment where you got your feet up and you're eating pizzas and, you're slopping around trying to get this done at 12 o'clock when it's due the next day. That's not, that's not it. That's not for marks. It's for actually saving lives.
I don't see you that kind of person. I see you as being the person that would have it all done, and everybody would be talking about you having it all done while they're eating pizza at midnight. Going,
how did you know?
I absolutely hate her. She's already got it all solved already.
Yeah, but I couldn't wait. I was a weird person. I was like, what's the answer to that? Like, I really just wanted to know myself. Cool. I remember in second year fluid, I mean, I had a memory shot of a second year fluid mechanics course, and everyone failed it the first time around, of course, except me, right? But they warned us about it. Second year fluids, everyone's going to fail for. You're going to get best you can do is get a C. Beg the teacher. Yeah, he's gonna put you to your paces. Killer professor and so on. And I thought, come on, it's just fluid mechanics, and it's second year. I mean, what's he gonna do? Give me a Ph.D. question? Like what? I don't even know. And he hasn't even taught the principles. Well, how hard could second year be? I mean, it just baffled my mind. What are you guys doing? Like sleeping until the last minute? So I said, okay, let me take a look at, the question paper and just, again, just look at it in a cool, objective way. And sure enough, what he did, and this is the reason I got a good mark on it, it wasn't anything scary. It wasn't like, some convoluted equation or some convoluted, I'm going to drop this in an anti-gravity field and what is that going to do? It wasn't anything weird at all. What it was practicality versus equations. And he was trying to get across to the second year. I mean, by second year, come on, you're a serious engineer, but you called yourself that by that time. You're a student, you're gonna, be serious here. So he picked out all the things in engineering circles where your practical answer is going to be different than your calculation, just because of the nature of the beast. He picked out all of those, and those were his questions. So every time you would think, like, if you calculate like a load on a vertical thing, what's the load at the top? And if you actually did that load calculation, that static, what is the loading at the top, you come up with this really stupid number. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't make sense. And then you go and you look up, like, what could it possibly be? What are the numbers? And then you make a good guess. And that's how you got a good mark. But the first time he did that, I got really curious, like, why is this person doing this? So I went to him, and in those days you could see your professor. I don't know, today it's kind of harder, but in those days you could just, stay after. Yeah, stay after class or knock on his door. I think that's what I did. I went on a Friday, like after all classes were up, because, you're so busy trying to finish homework that during the week it's just too tough and you have labs and so on. So I think I waited till Friday, went to his door, knocked on it. I figured, he'd be a little mellow on a Friday. So I said, hey, I got this question for you. I did the homework. I mean, I'm not asking you, for any extra help on the homework. I finished it. I'm not asking, but I just wanted to know why you had this question. Whereas when, these kind of questions, and each one of them has answers, which is not calculation, straightforward calculation. Anyway, you get a ballpark, but then it's not going to be that. It looks weird. And he goes, yeah, that's why I put it on there. I want to know how many people were awake. And that's what all the questions are going to be like. So, hey, guess what? You passed the class.
psyops, right? But that's interesting. Again, it's about some people cannot deal with that level of ambiguity, right? They don't make good applied engineers.
Well, I find it funny, applied engineers, because engineers.
Well, it's a verb, right? It's a verb.
Touche, I got that. I mean, but you're totally right. Like I'm on your wavelength here, because I understand what you're coming from, is that they don't understand that that's what that is, that is an application of what you know to an engineering problem, and you better think of it like a real world problem. So I understand, that whole terminology of applied engineer, and it's like saying, think real world, don't think book. If you're thinking book wise, you're never going to solve the problem, right?
The other thing I want to just quickly acknowledge is what you were talking about there, the baloney meter, and taking someone like David Suzuki and Elon Musk, for example, two people really who I think have sort of been elevated to priesthood status and almost cult leader status, right? So there's a cult of personality there.
Yes.
Personality.
I love to talk about this topic. Thank you for bringing the word cult out, because I mean, even with Carl Sagan, I mean, people will think that I'm a groupie, but no, I actually read all his books, and I actually talked to him about Mars rovers one time. I mean, I was more on the science end of things. I was never into the whole, but there were people, because I volunteered to explain some of these planetary society, I think it was called, that they made up to create a nonprofit which would spin off from all of Carl Sagan's PR. So I volunteered for them, and I would in Toronto, and I would go and give lectures on, what is this latest Voyager spacecraft discoveries. I'd get the pictures from NASA, I'd put them up and say, here, this is what it's discovering now, and people can be inspired by it. So I was trying to educate the next generation, of youth, that I had the benefit of having that. So I wanted to make sure they got that. And there were some people who, adults mainly, who were more into the cult aspect of Carl Sagan. And I thought, this is really weird. You're misusing what could possibly help you to be a more scientifically minded citizen. You don't have to go into the field. Just like what he was talking about, a baloney booster, whatever, trying to cut through all the incorrect information and make yourself a more intelligent citizen. And I think citizen of the world should be enwrapped in this kind of questioning of scientific information, be science wise, even if you're not savvy at science, you can just be science wise and see if things make sense, and follow people around, not for their cult status or put them up on a pedestal. Now, the way people do that is make it into a cult status. I can totally explain. It's because people get lazy. So if you look at let's take the simple subject of Carl Sagan while we're at it, only because I lived through his era of promotion, being the face of science on TV. And I remember watching Nature of Things growing up. By the way, that was non-negotiable in our house. You had to watch David Suzuki's Nature of Things each week on Sunday night, or I think it was. So, having grown up in that culture, and I think that, Carl Sagan was a very prolific writer, and he writes extremely well, better than a lot of science writers. He makes a very complicated thing. And again, there'll be the critics. I know some people from Cornell will say, no, I don't want anyone to know that he graduated from, or he was a professor at Cornell. So there's that flip of the coin. You see, people are embarrassed about his cult. He was on Johnny Carson. Well, I hope he was, because then there's one more kid in that audience, maybe not staying up that late, who's going to watch him and go, oh my God, a scientist on Johnny Carson, sign me up. I mean, it's not nerdy anymore. It's okay. If he's going to be cool with Johnny Carson, it's cool to be a scientist. Okay, I can do this now. I don't have to be afraid of being nerdy. That's what I think would happen.
cults always end in the David Koresh Waco way, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's exactly it. Like, it's just people are too lazy to do the work. And so instead of picking up a book, like how many have actually read Cosmos? How many know the details of the stuff that's in there, you know? And
that's a key point you said. What we're basically doing is outsourcing our thinking to these people we've put on this pedestal, right? This is why critical thinking and actual science and STEM infused into culture is really important, because there have to be the people there to knock them off when they get too big for their boots, right?
Yes.
When they get a bit too culty and start sleeping with your wife, we got to do something about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be something that's more of the nature of an education, like a library, you know. I mean, so this person, you know, you don't even have to go into his personal. In fact, you don't want to know. I don't ever want to know the personality of the people who's writing. You know, you just want to stay away from that whole topic. You know, it may not be fun, because who cares, actually? What do I care? They've written an amazing book on whatever topic it is. I'm going to read that, and I'm going to get my information from it. I'm going to use that information for whatever purpose it might serve me to do the next problem-solving session of whatever it might be. And away I go, you know. And if he's written another book on said topic or another thing, I'll go read that. But I'm not interested in, you know, how he gets up, what car he drives, what his license plate is. You know, I mean, there was this whole cult thing with Carl Sagan, and I always stayed away from it, because I'm trying to use a person's platform to get me to my next thing, my next rung. What is that next? Okay, I want to get speeded up on inspiration on what people are doing or what's possible, and how. One of the things that Carl Sagan did really well is connect the past with the future through the present. Yes. He would talk about, the Ionians, the ancient Aztec civilizations, how they also were curious and discovered things that we may not understand today. We didn't answer those questions. Good and dandy, we didn't answer them, because that means there's a lot of unknowns, and we can use that kind of brain power and ingenuity and say, well, if they did it, well, why can't we do it? That kind of, you know, people have to spur you on, not limit you and make you into a more limited being. You got to seek out the people and their writings that expand you into the next version 2.0. Like, I want to be Hema 2.0. What are the things that are going to get me there? Who's the person that's going to get me there? Who is the book? You know, what's the book? What's the movie? What's the thing that's going to get me there? You know.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Can you find the drawing and supporting documents you need in less than a minute? Now you can with Echo. It's simple. Just type what you're looking for and press enter. Echo knows your building. Speak with a drawing specialist today. Ask about our special offer of painless onboarding plus 6 months free with Echo. Visit podcast.thedsoffer.com. That's podcast.thedsoffer.com.
And now, back to the show.
I'm listening to, and there's a thing or a statement we always talked about in engineering, and that is that, you know, we use the computer to derive the number to whatever decimal place we want in terms of numerical accuracy. We get out.
I have a story about this too, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So then we get out into the field and we measure it with calipers, but we mark it with a chalk and then we cut it with a chainsaw.
That was a really good example. I love that one.
Right.
That's
and so we have a lot of people picking up the chainsaw.
Yeah, did you file down that chainsaw to the exact decimal point of the?
Exactly. And so, you know, and we have a lot of people stuck in the computer world. Yeah. And I think, you know, and Adam, you would probably agree with this, that when we look at really competent engineers and scientists, they know how to use the chainsaw, but they know where the number came from. And they, you know, and so there's a really good practical understanding. What do the numbers mean? How do we, like you were saying, Hema, that's exactly what you were saying. And I think, you know, going back, because I want you to talk about COVID and aerosols and that type of stuff. We have a lot of people within a myopic field, and I'm not putting all epidemiologists or virologists or public health. specialists in that silo. Some of them have expanded beyond just the computer, and they know how to use the chainsaw, and they've sought out other people along that chain, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, unfortunately, are in the silo. They're at the numerical or the computer stage, and they're driving public policy, and we have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about using your integrated knowledge, because you have such a broad base of studies and knowledge, and you've been able to put the pieces together? Can you use your integrated knowledge and talk about where we are in the world of transmissions and the epidemic or the pandemic that we have, and where you think we're going over the next 12 months, if you would?
Well, I want to start with that excellent question. I want to start with a joke, though, because I'm of the generation that was just as slide rules were going out and calculators were coming. I know, right? I'm speaking to the choir. Okay, so because in our day, I was on the cusp, so there was half and half, but the thing is that in the time of slide rules, you had to know the answer, right? I mean, first you figure out rough, 9.8 meters per second squared, the guy's going this velocity, okay, well, I kind of say, okay, that's probably going to be 30 feet. And then you go on the slide rule, that's how you would do it, because you had to figure out round of park first. Otherwise, the slide rule is not going to tell you, it's going to tell you what you put in. So I remember I was on that in between thing, and I wrote a physics exam. I think it was first or second year. I can't remember what year it was, but it was physics. And I did the whole exam. They had you in this big gym, right? Everyone. And so I had my slide rule, and I did all the answers, with the slide rule. So obviously the enough decimal places were not there, but the answer was ballpark. So I think a TA, marked it. And I didn't, get a good mark. And I got the final exam back, and I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not that bad. I can't understand what happened. Was I did I write was I in the wrong room? Did I write the wrong exam? So I went to the teacher. Again, in those days, you could not, little did I know that the instructor for my course was the chairman of the department. I always thought, wow, professors have swanky offices. I walked into this gigantic office because he's not just a chair. He was big Joe. And so I walked into his office and I said, well, he must have been an amazing person to talk to, that undergraduate who wrote a final exam. But I guess in those days it was uncommon. Maybe I had more courage than anybody thought. What is this girl trying to tell me? Should at least give her the credit for having the courage to face me. So anyway, I walked in and I said, I heard I got, this mark on the final exam. I don't think I think I know what I'm talking about. So how did that happen? And he said, oh, well, let's go take a look. And he said, well, it seems that it looks like, you just had decimal places that are wrong or something. And I said, well, that's not a reason to get bad marks. I used a slide rule. And he goes, you used a slide rule? Holy cow. Okay, well, that changes everything. Okay, no, you must know what you're doing here, because it seems right, but it's just your decimals were off. You had the number right, but the other thing. And I said, well, who marks an exam based on that? Anyway, that was totally wrong to begin with. But anyway, I got all my marks, and I got an A+, so that could help. But that tells you what a little bit about going back to, analysis and data and numbers and number crunching. Just answering your question, again, we're going to have to go back to this multidisciplinary approach. And I think this COVID and this current pandemic we're at has brought to the surface how multidisciplinary the solution is, because it's not just, it's building science totally, yes. But on top of that, the medical field has to be involved. Now, if you go to, standard numerical solutions of how fluid flows, and I know, I've worked in the high-speed flow, so people are going to say, well, what do you know about, slow flows, breath of 0.2 meters per second? It's not going to be the same as 340 meters per second for speed of sound. But true, but flow is flow in the sense that when you have two types of flow, basically. I mean, people are going to yell at that, but you do have two types of flow. One is a very predictable, let's call it, subsonic laminar flow. Let's just, for all intents of this discussion, this loose discussion, I'm going to be a little bit imprecise here, but let's just say a little bit more predictable laminar subsonic flow. Let's just call it that. And then there's this turbulent nature of flow. Now, in any speed, whether it's supersonic flow or whether it's, breath, if there's turbulence in the flow, which there is in human breath, only because air currents, we're not breathing in a straight flow. There's always going to be an air current. Like if I lift my pen, there's an air current. If there's another person in the room, there's another air current. If there's a window, there's an air current. You cannot escape the fact that these particles are so small, like, you're talking about micrometers type particles of different sizes, and they're coming out. I mean, if this COVID is related to breath, which has some fluid in it, then there's different people who have different claims of the trajectory. But ultimately, the ultimate question is there randomness in it or not? The answer is there is going to be randomness in it, because this is one of those 0-1 type problems, meaning that if it's even a little bit one, it's one.
Right.
So, it's one of those situations, because
Right.
One COVID particle is all you need. You don't need a whole bunch. You just need one to cause death. So even if there's the possibility of one particle, so if you say stochastically speaking, they're fluid laden and they're all going to go to the ground, and in 2 meters, they're not going to touch the next guy, then if I can show you one counterexample, and we already have done this, where, a person lifts their pen and then that particle goes further because he spoke, he's infected, he spoke, and he lifted his pen. Now that particle, instead of going down to the floor where your trajectory would have said, that fluid-laden particle now got some buoyancy all of a sudden and is traveling in this direction to this other person. So once you have a stochastic nature of any problem, all computational models have to be suspect, and they can't be taken for it's more or less right is not good enough. I'm not putting anything against those people who do it. They're geniuses. Even getting so far is you have to work on the problem, right? You can't start you can't go from 0 to 100. So you have to work on the problem. You have to, but again, that baloney detector, you have to say, if I'm going to solve the human problem of life and death, how much weight am I going to assign to this solution of the problem? And the epidemiologist cannot just talk about the experiment they did in the hospital with different circumstances, because that person's theory of their hospital nature of environment of COVID flow is going to be different from the politician who has to open the restaurants because the economy is tanking and all the restaurant owners are not making money. So the real problem that we all have to solve is have an integrated approach. I mean, I'm not talking from the pulpit here. This is just my personal opinion, having studied this and having certain amounts of information, been exposed to certain people's work, some of it proprietary, but just being exposed to the information and having to be involved with it at some level, I can say that the nature of this beast of life and death in this COVID pandemic is extremely multidisciplinary. The moment we accept that and move from that vantage point is the first day of that we will be closer to the problem, to the solution.
I got like goosebumps. I don't know if you can see it. I got goosebumps from that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, and I know there's several people who are trying to, like a lot of institutes are trying to, push different disciplines on the problem, and I totally understand where that's coming from, but unless it's integrated and organized, a cardiac surgeon who knows what the thing does after it enters is one guy, but he knows after it enters the human body what the respiratory consequences are of that. We need that person. We also need the school teacher who's going to be the recipient of said decisions that we have made post the situation that's come up. We have to open a school. At some point, we're going to have a school that's completely open, and the children have to be organized in some way at some level. And that person better be in the room, because then that person can tell us that this solution doesn't work because this. Then let's put all our heads together again and go, what would make you happy? And find that point where we can open a restaurant, we can open a school, and have more people live through it. And the only way we can do that is have people at the table, the virtual table, certainly the medical person, the building scientist, the teacher, the restaurant business owner, and a host of other people. There's got to be at least 10 different disciplines involved in this. It's not just one, the data scientist, definitely, and many more. Now, having said that, the reason things are going awry is because the stochastic nature of this beast has to be accepted by the population. The politics of it is another department altogether. So far, this COVID discussion between us three has centered around how do we solve a scientific problem? This is a scientific problem. How do we solve it? But now there is social presence. And going back to Adam's point about putting people on pedestals and then using them as a lazy way of, I'm a scientist. I'm a John Glenn groupie. I know all about his life. That really helps you. How much smarter are you by knowing about John Glenn's life? Did you study how he went to school and got on that, rickety rackety spacecraft, and how he survived in that thing because he used his brain and not because he relied on NASA, because by that time the signal would have been too late and he would have died? Did you read that part? So no, I, kind of thought he was a scientist. Ho, ha, ha. That helps no one. So there is this social angle we have to understand, and all of our problems now, yes, I'm going out on a limb to say this, but I can safely say that if we stuck to the science from the get-go and went that way with, what Robert was saying, the integrated route with all of these people throwing their brains on it, we would have been further ahead and had fewer deaths. And I know that people will say, how do you know? Well, because science is science. And if you just follow that, you would solve the problem sooner. The problem occurs when you have the social issue of this, basically, I don't want to understand the science. I want a clear-cut thing. And why can't I see my friends? You haven't explained that to me. Okay, you can see them, but they have to be 2 meters away is not an answer, because the person who said that knows full well that the COVID particles don't stop at 1.99.
You've really highlighted the real problem with any integrated multidisciplinary solution is that there's politics and there's egos. Yeah. So even on property projects, you get multidisciplinary teams, there's always this ego fight. It's always the architect, by the way, all you architects listening out there, showboating through the meeting, right, wanting to take over. So everyone talks, yes, we're all in this together, right? But
yes, I know.
Really.
Right. So working together, our social issues emanate from us not being able to work together in emergencies. And, I want to just touch on Robert's, discuss that he started on this, the COVID problem is an engineering problem and a scientific one. However, the solution involves this multi-integrated approach. Who needs to be at the table is the mental health expert and the person who can solve the people problem, because unless that person is in the room. Now, in the Next Generation Star Trek, they had a counselor on the ship, and we all thought, well, what's she doing there? But they understood that there's going to be mental health issues. And, as goofy as they made that character, I would have made that person a little more serious in terms of demeanor. But as goofy as they made that character, they've understood that mental health is an issue, and it's going to destroy the scientific problem solution is going to be a stack of cards. It could be rendered into a stack of cards by a mental health crisis, which we now have. But the mental health crisis that we created, I can just say that we created it. Because from the beginning, if we had followed the science and not done this, the particles don't end at 2 meters is a known fact. The fact that this is a stochastic flow field, I mean, everybody can agree on that there is a lot of randomness. And as much as I respect the data scientists, because they have to push that envelope forward, you got to start somewhere. F equals ma, okay, you got to start somewhere with some equation somewhere and then go from there. And I respect them, and I think that work should continue. However, if you're dropping that down from here to the social, to the political and the social, you need to have a more serious grasp of the implications of assuming the decisions you're making. Like if that particle leaves and people are masked, people are not masked, what kind of masks are they removing their masks? If there's dining involved, then people are going to be unmasked, in which case there's no equation that can save you. Then the building scientist has to come in and say, well, what can we put around this person? Just the logic of the whole flow field, with the problem solving flow, this is what we call it, right? If they had done it that way, then I think we may have a better solution. But hindsight is 2020. So for me to sit here and say that is really easy. But I empathize with the politicians trying to deal with the social implication of engineering solutions.
Yeah, but using Star Trek to analyze everything, which is always a good idea. Taking the Spock side of this, what I think is missing from this multidisciplinary soup is probability and statistical analysis, Bayesian statistics, right? So you could say we can accept everything you've said, and on some TV shows you'd have been muted by now, right? Because of the heresy you just spewed out. Randomness, you don't know everything, how dare you? But if you take everything you've just said, which I accept fully, and the randomness of it, and the fact it's not 100%, nothing's 100%. If you don't add in analysis, statistical analysis, probability analysis, and then a politician could stand up and say, look, on balance, if you're in this group, get on with it, except, there's no more risk than, say, normal flu. And if you're this group, be careful. And if you're this group, stay home until we work this out, right?
Yeah.
But that seems to be missing, because politically, you're not going to get re-elected if you say, it's difficult and some of you might get it. No one's electing that person.
That's really, you hit it, because that's bang on the problem. And I think what happened to us as a society, a worldwide society now, because we're all in this together now, all of a sudden, what happened is this was coming at some point. The politicians, I think the smarter ones, knew that at some point I'm going to have to make a really difficult social implication decision, but I don't have to do it now. So I think they knew that was coming down the pipeline, because it's inevitable, right? Inevitably, you're going to have to make. If you're in the business of leading people, even when we had the tanking of the financial industry way back, when the United States had Obama take over in that cusp of time. Yeah. They were trying to make decisions. Again, that's not as life-threatening. It's not life and death, but it is people, losing all of their money. That kind of is in a sense life-threatening in that sense. But again, yeah, and they were trying to make decisions there again. Politics and social scientists were trying to figure out, and economists in that mix. Those were the three groups that had to get together to make decisions and say, no, don't buy another house until we've organized this kind of a thing. So I think that they were caught off guard in the sense that, there's going to be down the road a very difficult political decision that all of them have to make in order to create safety, but they didn't realize it was going to come in 2020. That's when they were caught off guard.
On the other person's watch. There's a great interview I had with this European politician, and she said, the truth is, we all know what we have to decide. We just don't know how to get re-elected if we decide it that way.
Oh, that is so spot on. So spot on. Yeah, exactly. And we saw this in Quebec. I don't know if Robert was party to this whole big popcorn gate conversation. This is important for our conversation, but I don't even know if Adam knows. Do you remember this?
No.
Okay, well, in Quebec, just over here from Ottawa, where I am, just over the thing, where the border is Quebec. And then the premier had shut everything down. They were in the red zone. And then they said, we can open up, then he saw, mental health was going down, but their cases were going down. So he thought, okay, mental health was becoming an issue and the cases were going down. So then he said, okay, let's open up some movie theaters, but you cannot serve popcorn because masking, right? So in a safe zone, so it became popcorn gate because in the legislature of Quebec, he was made fun of. Our premier won't let you eat popcorn. And so you know what he has to do? He has to let them sell, yes, which is the bad way to go for you. And we know that.
So why couldn't that person get on TV and say, this is ridiculous. This is why I've made this decision and I'm not changing it. And if you don't like it, don't vote for me next time.
Well, that's a hard place to be because he knows he won't be. And if your votes are based on popcorn, maybe there's another problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to just, because we're getting towards the end of our interview here, which is too bad because this is wonderful.
Getting good.
But I do want to, illustrate for our listeners, this integrated and why it's important to bring the studies together, because we could take an epidemiologist and study the interaction of two people in a restaurant scenario. Let's just say, maybe it's a fancy place. There's 20 feet of glass.
Yep.
And there's two people, one person's exhalation becomes another person's inhalation. And then they say, okay, well, where does that break occur where there's, it's a risk assessment, the further they get away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know that stuff. And most aerosol scientists and the epidemiologists, they debate about terminology, but they understand that, okay? Mm-hmm. Now let's take those people and let's just move them out of that table for a second. And then we bring in the engineer. And the engineer will say, okay, well, the air temperature and the density of that air hits say it's a wintertime scenario. Warm air hits the glass, changes the density, changes the buoyancy, it drops down that glass, and now we have a draft. Mm-hmm. And then if there was an architect involved, and the engineer said, well, we want to break up that fluid flow off the window, so we're going to put a ledge. Mm-hmm. So now the air hits the ledge, comes down, creates a jet, right? And turbulent flow off of it. Mm-hmm. And now we know we have a discomfort problem, or we're trying to solve a discomfort problem with this ledge. Now that's people back into that table. Mm-hmm. And so now we have this randomness occur at a really big scale because these people, one person exhalation, one person's inhalation gets disturbed by this downdraft. We can't isolate that interaction. We need to understand the health component, and we need to understand the mechanical, the building side of it, and the architectural side. And unfortunately, we have only the epidemiologist looking at the epi side of it, the virologist looking at the virally part of it. And, we have to come together. There's no doubt about it.
True. I agree. Sorry.
Right? You have to accept randomness and the stochastic nature of this.
Exactly.
If you don't accept that, we ain't going to be getting anything done.
Right. Yeah. I've been doing low-cost experiments to teach parents how to teach their kids about the randomness. And one of them was a really cheap form of shadowgraph technology, which is kind of like Schiller-in photography, where you can actually see the thermal plume. So what I did, the sunlight was coming through one of my windows here. Right. And so I disturbed the sunlight with steam. I just took a steam kettle, and I heated up this plume of steam. And so the light came through it. And then you could see just this randomness on the wall. It was the shadow of the disturbance. And, I think my budget for that was $0.
What you have around the house.
And so we can teach society without the academics and the terminology and the complexity. Just by looking around us, we see what is happening. We just have to pay attention to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think you've actually addressed a few points. One is at-home education. If the parents themselves are otherwise distracted, even if they are capable of doing these fun things with their kids and they're into it, they are distracted by the economics of the current climate with everything else that's going on, having themselves to cope with the COVID environment, the pandemic environment, and all the ramifications thereof that have fallen to their plate in terms of just living life. That's number one. So you're considering a subset of parents who are now interested in educating. So now you've dropped, your percentage of that. So
right
now, but if I would be not to, I don't think it would be that bold to say that most parents don't fall into that category. They would just rather the school do it, and they would rather, do their thing, only because they've just so much on their, mind, to do that extra thing. Did you, we heard of the runoff of what happened when they were suddenly forced to homeschool, shock, of course, but, it took them a long time to wrap, why aren't the teachers doing it, So there was all of that. But and at home they could, we could all put together like 10 fun exercises you can do with your kids, and maybe, 20% of the parents will do it. That's what my guess is. And those that do it, I don't think fully will be able to transfer to the child the, what you can't see. I think the one principle of this pandemic that is hard for people to wrap their head around, even adults, is that it's something you can't see but has disastrous ramifications if you don't respect and acknowledge its presence. I think we can safely say that it is now everywhere. And it's a stochastic process of whether your interaction with it is going to cause ramifications or not. And the only way you can slow it down, as Robert taught that, all of these experiments are great for teaching children what we're dealing with. At least they will be able to wrap their head around it. But I think that because of the stochastic nature that we've proved of this thing that we're dealing with, because of this randomness, and I loved your example of how you can refit, dining areas, or, what the possibilities are. And I also loved Adam's comment that, you get many cooks in the pot and you get nothing that's edible at the end of the day, So it's not going to be, so that's going to be the problem there. So on the reverse side, I think the only, the bottom line out of this, conversation we can have as intelligent people, forget building science or data science, whatever it is you are, the intelligence in us tells us that we have to protect ourselves. Distance is not a factor. I mean, even yesterday I was hearing somebody say, people are going to be distanced. No, it's not going to help you. What you really need to do is just to, try to do as much not going out as possible, try to stay away, try to mask. I think masking changes the flow direction to up, because
up inside, right? It's still coming out.
It's still coming out, but it's changing the direction from interaction this way to up, and then it'll hit something else and it'll go out. So all to say that the particles are out there, they're not going to go anywhere else. What the epidemiologists will say then are the larger wet particles will be absorbed by the mask, but we already know that the micron size of COVID particles can be very small, which is the biggest problem we have. If they were all large, I think we would have solved it by now. It's just that we have smaller particles that are also COVID particles, and they will escape through holes in them. I mean, fluid has to go somewhere. There's conservation of mass. So you change the direction, it's going up now. But that just means your interaction in this plane isn't there. So by the time that particle hits something and comes back down, you may have bought yourself some time, is all we're saying. So your interactions really have to be limited. I think why we're here in 2021 with still the same problem, more or less, we had, I mean, with a vaccine, of course, which is not 100% anyway. So that's the other problem, the false safetiness of vaccines is even after the vaccine, I don't think everybody understands the fact that you're still going to have to be at home, you're still going to have to mask, and you're still trying to limit your amount of interaction with public spaces with other people and sanitize, the locations that you've done. So I don't think that's, this goes beyond what, going back to the first statement we made, this goes beyond just any one discipline. This is going to politicians, social scientists, building scientists, epidemiologists, and data scientists, and everybody else have to be in the mix, and aerodynamicists, whatever it is that takes to fly this plane that human beings are on. We have to be sensible, and the rationality of this is that it's not something you can solve with any one discipline.
One observation I've sort of had is we've lost the ability to accept that you can live a risk-free life, right? You can't live a risk-free life. So in the early 60s, the Hong Kong flu killed 1.5 million people.
Yeah.
Didn't make the news, didn't stop a single aeroplane flying, not one.
Right.
So, but then that was not too far from the Second World War. Things weren't as settled and as comfortable as they are now. There was a lot more acceptance of the randomness of and unfairness of death, right? Yeah. Whereas now we're in this like Kardashian bubble of like, you're awesome, you're lovely, you're wonderful, and it's gonna be great, you're gonna live forever, and it's not true. But
I totally agree. I think we have to get post-pandemic out of our vocabulary, because even yesterday, I forget who said it, but somebody was saying, what are you going to do in a post-pandemic world? When's that
happening? It's never happening. But
and a very intelligent cardiac surgeon, I think his name is Peter Juni, I forget now. I heard him say he's heading up another team in I think it's Toronto. I'm not sure exactly where he is, but he's a cardiac surgeon and he's heading up a team of multidisciplinary people. I'm not sure of the details of his work. All I know is that one statement he made at a town hall meeting a few weeks ago from the Fields Institute is that he said, forget life is going to, forget that life is ever going to go back. It's never going to go back to where it used to be.
Yeah. This is actually a good time to do our rapid fire questions, because we are getting on, and I want to actually segue with what you just said, because my question I have for you to sort of end today's presentation, Adam, of course, will fire one too, is that, if you could see yourself at Cornell giving a commencement speech to a graduating class, and you started your message with get comfortable with letting your past go, what would the message continue on to the students? What would you say to them?
I would say get comfortable with letting your past go, deal with the data you have now, use your brain, constantly rely on yourself and all the wonderful education you've come to the point to achieve to this point. You've clearly used your brain to this point. Don't let go. Don't lean on one specific person for all your information. Use yourself as your own propellant and propel yourself to do great things for humanity. Move forward.
Excellent. Okay, so using the Star Trek analogy one more time, do you remember Q, the character Q? There was a character in Star Trek Next Generation that picked up.
Oh, Q, yeah, of course, my favorite character, Q.
Yeah, he was this omnipotent person who could create. So I'm Q. I'm going to say you have the chance I will reset everything, and you can be preeminent either as a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, a banker, or just a social media star. Which one of them are you picking?
Sorry, what are those choices again?
social media star like Kim Kardashian. You're going to be a billionaire in any one of these, right?
Yeah.
So money's not the issue here. It's who you are. And you're starting from scratch. So you will be born as a young person.
Okay.
Right? social media star, like a movie star. That's a new movie star, right? A doctor, a lawyer, an investment banker, or an engineer?
Engineer,
Always?
hands down.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because you're using your ingenuity. That's what the word engineer means. I mean, the sky's the limit. You're not boxed into anything. You can use by definition, you're going to be using ingenuity. You're going to be using facts to base your conclusions. Just by definition, it's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, because it's always better to take the path where there's growth, I think, right?
Definitely.
There's always growth in that, because there's always some problem that he's solving. I love that. Yeah. That's a great way to wrap up, actually. So this has been our first Star Trek episode, I think.
No. Do I get to be Q and snap?
There we go. Yeah, totally.
Bing. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. I had fun. That was amazing. It was
thank you.
Fun topic. Yeah. It was great. Thank you very much for.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Adam, it's time to thank some people who are on our side. Blue Rhythm Commissioning Software.
Blue Rhythm is the commissioning software I've been looking for. Most projects I consult on suffer from poor information and document management. Frankly, it's just chaos out there. Blue Rhythm removes this chaos. It is a secure, always available cloud solution designed to work on any computer, tablet, or smartphone. Their Android and iOS apps allow seamless transition between online and offline work. But what I like most about Blue Rhythm is their painless and fast onboarding process. Their team will bring all your existing forms and checklists into Blue Rhythm for you, or you can use or adapt their pre-built, pre-functional and functional performance test sheet templates. But it's more than that. It enables collaboration, automation, and easy planning and project management for all your projects. Blue Rhythm provides amazing support from a team that really understands your industry. To find out more, go to bluerhythm.com or call country code +1 612 460 8305. Also, you can hear from Blue Rhythm President Andy Martin on episode 26 of the Edifice Complex podcast. Robert, are we there yet? I'm bored.
Adam, I know it's hard to believe, but the future has finally arrived in Canada.
How's that then?
Well, smart remote building and equipment management is now available from SensorSuite.
Go on.
SensorSuite, yep, they're an innovator in smart building technology. We like them. They can monitor, control, and optimize anything in your building, saving you time and energy.
You mean SensorSuite are moving Canadian buildings into the 21st century?
Yeah, I know, another hard thing to believe, but they're doing it, and they're saving owners money with efficiency gains.
Okay, I'm in. How do I find out more?
Got to go to sensorsuite.com or call 1-855-773-6767. And also check out the July 2020 episode of the Edifice Complex podcast and listen to SensorSuite CEO Glenn Spry.
And now, back to the show.
Adam, another amazing interview. You know, really, like, I mean, how could you? She is so inspiring. I could listen to her. I wish she was a professor for me. She's so inspiring, and I love how she puts things into just sort of easy to understand concepts. And because of her ability to integrate the different fields of study, she just really gets the macro, but her brain also has the ability to deal with the micro, you know?
Yeah. She reminded me, I kept thinking, God, the college and the university system sucks because there aren't teachers like that. And it always reminds me of one of my heroes, Dr. Feynman, right? So his thing was, you ever heard of him? He was a physicist, American physicist. He was the one who worked out why the space shuttle blew up in the end. He's passed away now. His heyday was the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then they called him back in the 80s to solve that problem. But his big thing was, if you can't boil down complex science and engineering issues so that normal people understand them, you don't understand them. So his classes were a mixture of heavy math and demonstrations. He really got the visual and the this equation, this is what this looks like, and he was a he was a very iconic teacher, but he was also a safe breaker and a card player.
Really? Okay, that's
personality, right?
That is cool.
Yeah, Dr. Feynman. There's a great documentary called "Are You Kidding?" or "Seriously, Dr. Feynman." It's worth seeing. He's really, really interesting dude. I follow him, and there's a Twitter account for him. He's the Sayings of Dr. Fung. He's freaking brilliant, man. But, you know, if people like him were, and Murty were in there, like, teaching wouldn't suck. School wouldn't suck so much. It would be more interesting. My question always, when you go to a bad project and you go to a project office and it just looks, it's disgusting, it's dirty, nothing organized. I always think to myself, why does it have to be like this? This is a choice, right? And you go to university and you get a shitty teacher. Yeah. Why is it like this? It doesn't have to be like this, right?
So you can tell, you know, when you get someone like Hema on, who obviously, you know, is a scientist and an engineer, an application engineer, but she starts talking about cults, you know, how cults get created and mental health. You know, she has that diverse study and understands how they come together. I loved her. We were talking before how we know when we have, you know, a good guest. Well, they're all good guests. Yeah. You know, let's face it, they're all good guests. And I go back to my filing cabinet and I look at the notes I've got and I go, I can't believe we had the opportunity to interview this person. Yeah. You know, but like I run out of paper. Like I start every interview with a blank folder, and then the sheet I read describing our guest. Yeah. And you know, like at the end of a good interview, like there's no room left. I'm actually searching my desk for more paper to write on. Was that again, and you know, but one of the things she like in the data side, you know, because I know that was your bailiwick that was, and she said, and this applies in so many ways. There has to be a brain in there, and then when you think about who's the master and who's the slave.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I love that.
That was a brilliant analogy. And when she started talking about that, I thought this is exactly what we have going on in the world, where we have, for example, again, I'm not picking on the epidemiologists, but some of them are guilty of, you know, letting their data drive, or they become slave to the data, but not looking at the right data.
Yeah.
You know, and part of that, and the data in many ways is their education. It's the dogma that they've been taught. It's the old stories that were in books and no one ever challenged it, right? And so the old information that came from the book drives their decision today, rather than the brain thinking about, well, does this make sense? And that's what Hema said. She said, you get all this data here, and does it actually have utility in the circumstances that we're dealing with?
Yeah. No, she was spot on with that, because she is a great example of someone who's got deep academic knowledge, yet can be applied and can think and join the dots, right? The dots between social sciences, political sciences, actual sciences, engineering, and how that interacts. That's where you get insight and change and movement forward from, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What you need.
And so when she was talking, and then that image came in my head about, you know, we use computers to calculate the values to whatever decimal place we want. And then we measure them with calipers, mark it with chalk, and then cut it with a chainsaw. Yeah, right. And so, you know, when she started talking about mental health and, you know, the fatigue and how people or get into a place where they don't care anymore. And that crowd is the chainsaw crowd. Like they've been, you know, and they don't quite understand the ramifications of their decisions. They don't understand the depth of the studies that have gone into put the mark on the log and why we're using calipers. But ultimately the politicians mark it with the chalk, and then society cuts it with a chainsaw. That the chainsaw murders, you know, they're done. Like they're tired and we're fed up, and they're just going to go back to the way it is. And of course, we're going to end up with a huge problem on our hands.
One of the most interesting, I think, important aspects of that discussion we just had was the cultism side of it. Because there's a cult personality in politics. There's a cult. So you think about follow the data, right? Who could disagree with that? No one's going to disagree with that, right? But it's become a meme. It's become political dogma, right? And then you get that who's the master and slave at the end of that line, right? So you've got a pile of data, right? So if it tells you, some people get in their car and the GPS isn't up to date and they drive into a goddamn field, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that is the danger of what's going on. We're at a real inflection point at the moment in society where you're having engineering, science, political issues, social issues, and health issues all butting heads, right? And something will give, and it could give in a bad way. That's what worries me, right? So from situations like this, I don't want to be dramatic here, hell on fire, but like fascism can come from, or bad politics can develop, or, you know, groups fight other groups, right? This is where real leadership really matters, right? And you look around, I don't see a lot of that at the top, and that's really what worries me. Because a leader, let's take, Prime Minister candidate, for example, just pick on Justin, right? He's a cult of personality in a way, right? So I'm him, my job is to get re-elected and survive, right? So what do? I need a fool guy. So I have a science czar or a health czar. That person's going right under the bus if it don't go my way, right? And this is where it starts getting squirrely and bad decisions get made, where you need that Churchillian type leader who says, you know what, I'm making a decision, you don't like it, vote me out, I don't care. That's what you need right now.
New Zealand.
See these people. Yeah, New Zealand's got some of that for sure.
You know, it was like, this is the way it's going to be. Yeah. And if you don't like it, there's a boat and a plane on the way out of our country. Just you're not coming back.
Yeah.
You know?
So leadership really does matter in times of crisis. It really
sure does. She said something else, which, you know, ought to be adopted by every educational institute on the planet, and that is be science wise.
I like that. That's a meme. That's a bumper car sticker.
Totally is a bumper car sticker or bumper sticker. Be science wise. You know, I don't think, you know, there's 3 words that are more powerful than that. And she, you know, she clarified, you don't need to be the scientist and, you know, get down into the weeds and understand the calculus that's involved, but just have an awareness of the science, you know, because it describes everything around us. It describes the light, it describes the flow of air, it describes temperature, it describes the breaking down of materials, everything in our life, agricultural, economics, there's a science element to it. You know, you don't have to be the scientist, but you need to be aware of the science, be science wise. I love that.
You know, one of the takeaways I'd like to leave people with today is, you know, if you're young, going to college or university, demand education, not just rote, go to chapter 4, do that equation. Demand education. And if you ain't getting it, go somewhere else. Because until there's a market that moves towards quality and moves away from, you know, standard bullshit, nothing's going to change. And it's on the people paying to demand that change, right?
Yeah. Baloney detection.
Yeah, exactly. That, right? Just, if you're feeling this is BS, trust your instincts. It's probably BS. Go somewhere else.
Yeah, you know, I used to hang out and do, you know, on Facebook and talking to friends and stuff like that. And I've actually backed away because
that's toxic, man.
Yeah, it's just like you know, these are people that I respect and colleagues that I've known for a long, long time. But it's like, what happened to your critical thinking? You know, like where's your baloney detection? And you know, they're functioning at the chainsaw level, and it's so I've sort of stopped. I pop my head in every once in a while and throw some stuff out there, but I can't deal with it anymore. You know, it's too hard to watch. People that I respect.
What you're seeing is intelligent people who should know better joining cults.
Yeah,
I'm associating with this gang because that's who I am. That's my personality, right? And then there's not a lot of thinking beyond that, unfortunately. I don't know.
What'd you think of her statement, "Frog in the well"?
I love that. I love that. I've been that frog many times.
You're gonna live and die inside that thing.
Yeah, that's the trick, right? You got to realize when you're in a silo and then climb out, right? Yeah, it's all right. You can make a decision. So when I was running the Toronto office for Cobalt Engineering as an MEP design firm, there were some people who just really wanted to do, I just want to be the electrical engineer. I don't want to, that's fine. As long as you can state that and know that, and people know that around you, that's good. You can deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Being in that silo and kidding yourself you're a multidisciplinary genius, that's where things start going really.
Using her astronautical, aerospace vocabulary, she used words like jettison.
That was interesting. I love that.
Like, I love the terminologies she used again, because she has that capacity. Anyways, I've got pages and pages of stuff that she said that I will cherish, and we're going to get her on, and we'll get her into some other stuff as well. But Adam, it was another awesome interview. Thanks again for making this possible. Really, this is again a great crowd, and I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to be with you on it. So thanks.
Good stuff, man. All right. See you on the next one.
All right. Cheers.
All right.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.